Coming up on Arirang News, President Moon Jae-in urges Japan to cancel its new restrictions on key technology exports to South Korea, calling for a return to free trade and talks. In the meantime, his administration is helping companies prepare to respond. South Korea's Finance Minister Hong Nam-yi joined that call, saying the restrictions of key materials for semiconductors and displays are a concern for the global economy. And President Trump's North Korea envoy, Stephen Biegun, heads to Europe to move things forward on the North's denuclearization. His schedule there might include meetings with officials from Pyongyang. It's 4:00 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us on our afternoon newscast. I'm Devin Whiting. Top U.S. nuclear envoy Stephen Biegun and his South Korean counterpart are expected to meet in Europe this week. This is seen as a chance for the two sides to coordinate before the U.S. resumes its working-level talks with North Korea. Kim Yo-sun has this report.
Stephen Biegun, Washington's point man on North Korea, will travel to Europe Monday for talks with his South Korean counterpart and European officials on measures to achieve Pyongyang's final, fully verified denuclearization. The U.S. State Department explained that Biegun's four-day visit to Brussels and Berlin is aimed at advancing Washington's shared efforts to bring about the regime's FFVD. Seoul's Foreign Ministry says Lee Do-hoon, Seoul's Special Representative for Korean Peninsula Peace and Security Affairs, will visit Germany this week to hold meetings with Biegun and German officials. There are high hopes for the meetings as they follow the announcement of the resumption of Pyongyang-Washington working-level talks by U.S. President Donald Trump and North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un when they had a hastily arranged encounter at the DMZ late last month. The focus is on whether the talks could lead to another summit between Kim and Trump. The officials are expected to discuss details of Washington's corresponding measures to Pyongyang, including humanitarian aid and the establishment of a liaison office. It's left to be seen whether they will also touch upon the issue of resuming the inter-Korean Kaesong Industrial Complex and Mount Kumgang Tourism Project. Some analysts also predict Biegun could meet with North Korean officials in Europe. Ahead of the second North Korea-U.S. summit in Hanoi, Biegun held a series of meetings in Sweden with the North's Vice Foreign Minister Choi Sun-hee in January. Kim Yo-sun, Arirang News.
South Korea's National Assembly is holding a confirmation hearing today for Yoon Seok-yeol, President Moon's pick for prosecutor-general. But it got off to a slow start, with some opposition lawmakers complaining that the nominee had not submitted some documents they requested. The hearing is likely to focus on accusations that Yoon meddled in a bribery case involving a former tax agency official, as well as a suspected case of fraud involving his mother-in-law. Yoon's views on the government's reform drive will also come up. Although the position of Prosecutor General requires a confirmation hearing, it doesn't require parliamentary approval. As the chief of Seoul Central District Prosecutor's Office, Yoon has investigated some high-profile cases, including the abuse of power scandal involving former President Park Geun-hye. What remains of the Iran nuclear deal is now on life support. Iran wants the European powers that signed onto it to come to the table and save it. Otherwise, Iran says it's prepared to start enriching uranium up to 5%. Lee Min-sun has more.
In a news conference broadcast live on Sunday, senior Iranian officials confirmed Tehran will move away from the commitments it made under the 2015 nuclear deal. Iran will reduce its commitments incrementally every 60 days unless the other signatories of the pact protect Iran from U.S. sanctions.
In a few hours, the technical work will be done, and enrichment beyond 3.67% will begin. We predict that Monday morning, when agency comes to measure our enrichment, will be higher than 3.67%.
According to the Iran's foreign ministry, the move comes as European members of the pact have failed to abide by the deal.
The reason we are starting our second step in reducing our commitments from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action today is that Europe and other members could not meet our demands, especially in the field of oil and bringing back our income. They haven't been able to do anything worthy.
The U.S. strongly denounced Iran's latest move and said it will continue to impose maximum pressure on Iran unless the nation stops developing nuclear weapons.
Iran better be careful, because you enrich for one reason, and I won't tell you what that reason is, but it's no good. They better be careful.
The other signatories have also expressed grave concerns over Iran's threats, including Britain's foreign minister, who said the Middle East will be far more dangerous if Iran acquires nuclear weapons. The UK's top diplomat said they are very concerned and would like to find a way to make the deal work, but warned of very serious consequences if Iran breaches the deal. During a cabinet meeting Sunday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called Iran's announcement an extremely dangerous move and urged European leaders to impose strong sanctions on Tehran.
This is very, very dangerous step. I call on my friends, the heads of France, Britain, and Germany. You signed this deal and you said that as soon as they take this step, severe sanctions will be imposed. That was the Security Council resolution. Where are you?
Despite Tehran's continued threats, the government insists it remains open for dialogue and is leaving the door open to diplomacy. French President Emmanuel Macron says he and Iranian President Hassan Rouhani have agreed to seek conditions for resumption of dialogue by next week. 이민선, Arirang News.
A South Korean Catholic priest has been appointed to head the Vatican's diplomatic mission to Liberia. That's 37-year-old Father Chung Da-un, who will be serving at the Apostolic Nunciature in Monrovia. This will be Father Jung's first post after having completed his diplomatic training. He's the third Korean priest to be designated a nuncio, the Vatican's term for a diplomatic representative. President Moon has weighed in publicly for the first time on Japan's new trade restrictions against Korea. He's called on Japan to drop the measures and settle the dispute through negotiations. And he says he'll spare no effort to support the Korean companies that'll be affected. Our Park Hee-jun has more.
President Moon Jae-in has demanded that Japan calls off its latest trade restrictions in its first public remarks since the announcement of the export curbs.
일본 측의 조치 철회와 양국 간의 성의 있는 협의를 촉구합니다. 무역은 공동 번영의 도구여야 한다는 국제사회의 믿음과 일본이 늘 주창해온 자유무역의 원칙으로 되돌아가기를 바랍니다.
President Moon's meeting with his top aides on Monday comes at a time of troubled bilateral relations, stemming from Japan's new set of export controls on key materials bound for South Korea for making chips and smartphone displays. President Moon said he will try to resolve the dispute calmly in a diplomatic manner, but he made it clear that he will not stand back while Korean companies suffer the consequences. He promised to draw up short-term responses and solutions to minimize the damage.
전례 없는 비상황 상황에 무엇보다 중요한 것은 정부와 경제계가 긴밀하게 소통하고 협력하는 것입니다. 청와대와 관련 부처 모두가 나서 상황 변화에 따른 해당 기업들의 애로를 직접 듣고 해결 방안을 함께 논의하며 필요한 지원을 아끼지 말아야 할 것입니다.
And to do that, President Moon is planning a meeting with the executives of 30 major South Korean companies on Wednesday. They're expected to include Samsung Electronics, one of the companies most affected by the restrictions. Taking the lead in dealing with the issue, the president is expected to exchange ideas on possible solutions. Park Hee-jun, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, an economy-related ministers' meeting was held in Seoul this morning to discuss a range of issues affecting South Korea, including measures in response to Japan's new export regulations. Kim Hae-sung reports.
At a meeting with economy-related ministers on Monday, Finance Minister Hong Nam-gi again urged Japan to scrap export tech-related curbs on South Korea.
Japan's export restriction measures run counter to the principles of the WTO agreement. The measures will not only negatively affect South Korean companies, but are also a concern for Japanese companies and the whole global economy.
His repeated calls for Tokyo to lift the export restrictions come after Japan's restrictions on exporting high-tech materials, namely fluorine polyamide photoresistant etching gas to South Korea, went into effect last Thursday. Korean companies use the three materials to produce chips and display panels, which are used to supply other global companies like Apple and Sony, meaning Japan's export restrictions could have a ripple effect through the whole global supply chain. Minister Hong said the government will work closely with Korean companies to minimize losses and work with other countries in the global community, adding that the APEC summit and IMF annual meeting are scheduled for the latter half of this year. At the meeting, he also identified the U.S.-China trade spat and Brexit as key external risks and vowed to keep monitoring developments, adding that while U.S.-China trade tensions have eased with the two sides agreeing to resume trade negotiations, uncertainty and its effect on the high-tech industry remains high. In addition, he said South Korea is working on diversifying its trading partners, including establishing a bilateral free trade agreement with Malaysia, and will also help local companies win more overseas infrastructure projects. 김혜성, Arirang News.
There are signs from the Japanese government that the new trade restrictions on South Korea are more than just diplomatic retaliation over the forced labor issue. Comments from Prime Minister Abe and from one of his top aides seem to be that the restrictions seems to tie the restrictions to South Korea's relations with the North. Won Jung-hwan has this report.
Appearing on local TV on Sunday, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe said the tightened restrictions on exports of semiconductor manufacturing materials to South Korea is due to what Japan deems to be the occurrence of an inappropriate matter. Japan's Trade Ministry first mentioned the term a week ago when the measures were first announced, but did not clarify what it meant. Many watchers say the restrictions are clearly a reaction to Seoul's stance on a dispute over compensation for wartime forced labor. But it now appears that inappropriate matter may involve North Korea, considering Abe's latest statement. While commenting on South Korea's relationship with North Korea, including on sanctions and trade, Abe said he does not trust Seoul anymore. Abe did not elaborate, but it seems to go along with a statement made by one of his close aides last week, saying the restrictions are due to the unknown final destination of their export products. Goichi Hagiuda stated that chemical products exported to South Korea could have gone to North Korea for military purposes. He explained that during a certain period, there was a massive order for etching gas, and the South Korean company overseeing the order is now unreachable. Watchers say Abe's remarks and those of his close aides suggest Japan imposed the restrictions as it assumes their export products could have gone to North Korea via Seoul. But Abe's critics in Japan accuse him of using Korea to rally right-wing supporters behind him and his nationalist party ahead of the upper house election set for later this month. They say Abe thinks he can garner more votes by taking a hardline stance on Korea. Won Jung-hwan, Arirang News.
Analysts are saying that Japan's new measures will in fact end up hurting big Korean tech firms like Samsung, LG, and SK Hynix. And that impact could be felt by the South Korean economy overall. Our Go Ryun-hee explains.
Some of Korea's IT industry sources say firms aren't immediately feeling the impact of Tokyo's export restrictions on materials needed to make chips and displays. That's mainly because Korean firms have stockpiles of the materials. However, many analysts say the restrictions will hurt Korean firms in the long run, citing Korea's dependence on chip material imports from Japan. The tighter export curbs target three materials. For photoresist or light-sensitive materials that are used in chip manufacturing, more than 90% of Korea's total imports come from Japan. For fluorinated polyamides, used for making displays using Samsung and LG smartphones, the figure was almost 94%. An economic expert explained the reason behind the high share.
The quality of items that Korea imports from Japan is very high. Because Korea's chip and Japan's high-tech material sectors rely on each other, it's difficult for us to find other markets aside from Japan. It will take a long time for other countries, like those in Europe, to catch up to Japanese technology.
Experts say that Japan's move might not only hurt the nation's economy, which relies on chip exports, but it also may possibly affect the global chip industry in the long run, considering that Korean tech giants were among global semiconductor sales leaders in the first quarter of this year. Now, all eyes are on how the two countries' governments are handling the matter. Government officials are considering all necessary countermeasures, including taking the matter to the World Trade Organization, where the dispute settling process is expected to take around 2 to 3 years. Korea's trade minister said earlier that Japan's move goes against the norms of the WTO, whereas Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe argued the opposite, claiming it is a national security issue. A local expert explained the reason behind Seoul's announcement.
The WTO forbids members from imposing export restrictions aside from tariff measures, but there are cases when restrictions are allowed. One is when the country applying the measures is facing a shortage of raw materials. The other is when the country's national security is being threatened. However, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe is not explaining the reason when mentioning the national security issue.
Experts emphasize that the two sides must avoid economic tit-for-tat, as this could cause even more harm to both their economies. 고르니, Arirang News.
It's time now for an in-depth look at the markets on this Monday, and for that I'm joined on the line by Dr. Hwang Se-eun, Research Fellow at the Korea Capital Market Institute. Dr. Hwang, thanks for coming on today.
Thanks for having me here today.
Well, U.S. jobs numbers for June were looking quite good, and that seems to have put a major damper on expectations for an interest rate cut from the Fed. Wall Street was down, though, on Friday. What's the story today?
In Wall Street, stocks fell from all-time highs on Friday after the release of stronger jobs data dampened hope for easier Federal Reserve monetary policy. The Dow Jones Industrial Average pulled back 0.16%. Snapping a 4-day winning streak. The S&P 500 slipped 0.2% and ended a 5-day winning streak. The jobs number was solid in the U.S., and investors' concerns will be shifting very quickly to what the number means in the context of what we are pricing in for the Fed in July. Asian shares slipped on Monday as investors wagered on a less aggressive policy easing in the United States. Global equities have generally been bolstered by expectations that central banks will keep interest rates at or near record lows to boost economic growth. However, those expectations were tempered by a U.S. labor report. Japan's Nikkei faltered 0.98%, while South Korea's Kospi lost 2.2%.
Yeah, big drop there on the Kospi. Now, there are reports in the Japanese media that the government of Japan is going to impose yet more restrictions on exports to Korea, this time on certain machine tools, carbon fiber, and other products. What do you see happening here?
Some of the domestic IT companies are likely to have tangible trouble in production activities. Samsung Electronics and other chip makers are experiencing trouble finding alternative suppliers for the materials, and there could be only a few days' worth of supply remaining in stock. Japan accounts for 70 to 90% of the production of the materials being targeted. Samsung Electronics Vice Chairman Lee Jae-yong traveled to Japan on Sunday apparently to meet with local business leaders and discuss Seoul's response to Tokyo's retaliatory limits on exports of high-tech materials. This shows that Japan's export restrictions are a real threat. The uncertainty over external economic condition is widening as the additional Japanese export curves are quite likely to be introduced.
Well, coming up this week, we have a few things such as the minutes from the June Fed meeting, a major report from the Korean government on the economy. What should we be watching there and elsewhere?
Here are some key events coming up this week. Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell testifies before Congress on monetary policy and the state of the United States economy on Wednesday and Thursday. A key measure of U.S. inflation, the Core Consumer Price Index, will be released this week. The index is expected to increase 0.2% in June from the prior month, while the broader CPI is forecast to remain unchanged from May. In Korea, the Ministry of Strategy and Finance will release the Green Book on Friday. The Green Book is a report on domestic economic trend issued every month by the ministry. The government has been diagnosing the economy being sluggish for 3 consecutive months in Green Book from April to June. The Statistics Korea will release June's jobs data on Wednesday. The government raised the target number of employed workers from 150,000 to 200,000, and investors are quite interested in the feasibility of the target.
Yeah, we'll be watching that indeed. All right, Dr. Huang, that's where we'll have to leave it today. Thanks so much for coming on. We appreciate your insights. Now, Seoul's palaces and shrines saw 5.2 million visitors in the first half of this year, the second highest number on record. According to the Cultural Heritage Administration on Monday, visitors to Seoul's 4 major palaces and the Jongmyo Shrine during the January to June period this year jumped 26.3% from the previous year. This is the second time the number of visitors has exceeded the 5 million mark. And the number was just 40,000 below the record set in the first half of 2016. It was the first time that free ticket holders have exceeded paying visitors. The number of Chinese visitors was also significantly higher, increasing by 125% compared to last year. Farmers in Southeast Asian countries like Vietnam and Thailand have a growing preference for South Korean fertilizer. It's a big business, now reaching even Australia. Park Se-young explains.
Thailand is the biggest importer of Korean fertilizers. Based on solid trust, the two countries have been doing business for more than 40 years.
Namhae understand the market in Thailand. This is the most important part, and they produce very good product. Fertilizer from Namhae is outstanding.
Vietnam is the second biggest importer of Korean fertilizers. Last year, Vietnam imported about 100,000 tons of Korean-made fertilizers. The most popular are black DAP fertilizer products, which make up half of the total shipments. Not only are DAP fertilizers suitable for the increasingly popular fruit and vegetable farming in Vietnam, the fertilizer's black color has been customized to meet the preference of Vietnamese farmers. As a result, Korean fertilizers are being sold for around $520 per ton, which is more than $100 more expensive than Chinese-made fertilizers. Korean fertilizers are gaining popularity in the Philippines, Cambodia, and Myanmar, and exports have also reached Australia and Japan. To meet the rising demand from importers, fertilizer maker Namhae is looking to increase its export volume to as much as 90,000 tons.
Our black DAP meets the world's highest quality standards and is #1 in the Vietnamese market. Therefore, our supply is not able to meet the high demand. We're looking to increase the volume produced by adding fertilizer factories.
Because Namhae Chemical is an affiliate of the National Agricultural Cooperative Federation, its earnings from exports of about $200 million a year are used to subsidize fertilizer sold locally, so Korean farmers can buy fertilizer for cheap. Park Se-young, Arirang News.
Now, with people spending more time outside during the summer, the South Korean government is sounding the alarm about the diseases carried by ticks. The Korea Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says there have been 46 cases this year of severe fever with thrombocytopenia syndrome, or SFTS. Among those infected, 11 died. The highest number of cases were recorded in Gangwon-do province. Symptoms include fever, nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. Because there are no effective treatments for it, people doing outdoor activities are advised to wear long-sleeve shirts and long pants. It also helps to use insect repellent and to take a shower and change your clothes after spending time outside. And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thanks for being with us. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.